Oh my gosh. Jesus Christ. So why haven't I talked about Capital One in the last 5 or 6 years being in the points of miles game? I got my first 2 credit cards with Capital One. Why do I never talk about them? If you look at my channel over the last couple of years, I never really made too many videos on them. In fact, the only videos I really make on Capital One are just talking about news updates or pretty much just raising your credit limit with the Quicksilver card. The reason for that is just, well, I'm not interested. No, it's not because Credit One predates Capital One and Capital One actually stole their logo. It's definitely not because, they stole my name, right? It's definitely not one of those. But really, I'm just being facetious, but for the most part, when I'm thinking about Capital One, I'm not necessarily excited. Because the only 2 cards that I can realistically see the general population actually enjoying would be the Capital One Platinum Secured card and the Capital One SavorOne. And I already hear you Venture X heads out there, alright, I heard you, okay? I think the Venture X is a good card too, but we'll talk about it. And as much as I'm just not really that interested in Capital One cards, I will never hate them as much as Sledge does. That's why today we're going to be talking about Capital One? Is that you? That's why we're going to be talking about 3 things. Number 1 is just exactly why I only have 2 Capital One credit cards, and they were like my first 2 cards, and why I never got any more after that. And number 2, basically in that same vein, is just exactly what I don't necessarily like about Capital One. And then number 3, of course, is what I do like, because they do a lot of things very, very well. And you can also see why I didn't necessarily jump on the hype of the Venture X card when it was kind of blowing up recently. And by the end of all this, you'll basically see why I don't really talk about Capital One in the first place. At least until today. So firstly, I want to start with the old adage of what got you here won't get you there. And basically what that means to me is Capital One is that card for a lot of people. It's the cornerstone. It's the reason why we're all in the points of miles game in the first place, right? We got a Capital One secured card. We put down a $49 deposit. We got back a credit line of $200, and they were the only bank to actually approve us for our first credit cards, and now that's why we have a credit score that can get us some crazy cards in the first place today. And while I do appreciate that for a lot of people, I'm not necessarily a beginner anymore, right? I'm kind of like inching towards the intermediate status where I have, 15 to 17 different credit cards at this time. I can't remember. And I actually want to start traveling, right? That's been the gist of this channel lately, is just I want to go to see things that I haven't necessarily seen in my entire life. And to do that, to enhance that experience, I need some premium travel cards, right? And for the most part, Capital One doesn't necessarily foot that bill. Now, I get it. The Venture X is an amazing card, right? It's super easy to justify, but as Caesar would say, it's not the best.
Capital One Venture X. Everyone loves the card. Easy to justify. Is it better than the Platinum? No, it's not even close. Because there's no other car in the market that can cover your entire trip experience with hotel status, car rental status, clear, TSA check. So what other cars provide that? None. Other cars can be the best if they don't cover your entire travel experience. They can be easier to justify, but they're not the best.
And the reason I would say that is because, well, it doesn't necessarily have all the perks and benefits that you would want when doing these awesome travels. No hotel statuses, right? Because the Platinum card comes with gold status between Hilton and Marriott. Now, of course, you can get other credit cards that get those statuses, but if I want one travel card, it's probably not going to be Venture X. It's probably going to be Platinum. Also, while traveling, you're also going to be getting access to certain lounges. And American Express does have the widest selection, at least, of luxury lounges that you could possibly go to. And at that, a lot of lounges that it does share in common with the Venture X as well. And for lounges for Capital One, well, they do have Capital One lounges, which are, few and far between, and of course, Capital One cafes. And much like Chase, the lounge access is sparse, right? So it's like, if you're going to pick one travel card, I'd rather go with the one that has statuses, and it does have premium lounge access, which kind of comes more into play the more and more that you travel, which I plan to hopefully do in these next couple of years. So I see it almost as like a call option for the future, right? You think there's going to be potential future value on these 2 different issuers like Chase and Capital One for the lounge space in the future, but it doesn't mean I need to stake my life on it and get the card now. It just means I get to be more looking forward to it in the future when those more and more lounges are out there. And actually, Capital One cafes are pretty cool. You basically get 50% off, everything that's actually in there. We went to one in Vegas, and you actually get that just for being a Capital One credit card holder. So literally me with my Platinum secured card, get 50% off drinks or whatever it is. So again, if you do like those, you live in DC, something like that, and where they are very plentiful, you don't really need a Venture X for that. You just need a credit card with Capital One. Now, in that same vein of just lounges and future potential, etc., we have seen that a lot of people have been upset with the Venture X and just Capital One as a whole lately, just based on the perks being taken away, like on the Venture Series and Priority Pass perks. Also on the Venture X, a lot of people have been talking about the Hertz presidential status kind of coming away. Also, a lot of people are upset when the $300 travel credit was just like a little bit harder to use. For good or for bad, but at least for the most part, Venture X is kind of taking more and more perks away as time goes on because it was such an easy card to kind of get. justify the annual fee right off the bat and gave you some decent value for travel. But as they're taking things away, people are starting to wonder, like, huh, was I gypped? Is Capital One gypping me? You know, what's necessarily to come to the Venturex? Is the annual fee going to raise soon? And then what are we all supposed to do? Which I can understand is, you know, good and bad to all issuers. All of them raise annual fees and take perks away, etc. But it seems like a little bit of a theme with Capital One, right? Like, yeah, a little bit of a theme. Speak of the devil. So right here, it's 3 o'clock, January 14th. And look what they just did right here on the screen right here. The Venturex, the Spark Miles, the card holders now no longer have 2 free annual visits towards the Capital One Lounge. Now they have to pay $45 every single time that they visit. So just more and more taking things away, right? Of course, these aren't the most premium cards, but in the same vein, they're taking things away. All right, let's go back to it. Look at some of their other cards, like the SavorOne cards, the Quicksilver cards. They come with Uber One memberships, right? That's pretty good. But for the most part, they are between 3 and a year long. So after that, you're not getting those perks anymore, which is why some people actually get those cards in the first place. So it's almost like a give them as much value as possible on the front end and then kind of take it away as time goes on. You know, even though it seems like these offers kind of last for years and years, it just seems like that's the general thought of what Capital One is doing, at least for these types of credit cards that we're going for. I also want to mention, like, on the point of actually applying for these said credit cards, these premium cards, they don't make it easy, right? And in one way, I respect it. I like the exclusivity. But a lot of people have mentioned, like, the Venturex is harder to get than any other credit card in the world, and I believe it. Now, I don't know if this is necessarily inherently, or it's because they do 3 hard pulls for the most part anytime you actually do an application with Capital One credit cards. If it's a way to limit lounges, or they just have a prerequisite for how many cardholders they want, and maybe they just don't apply past a certain point. Who really knows what's going on in the back end? But it does leave a lot of people upset and, you know, wanting their own Venturex cards and SavorOne cards, etc., to actually use and enjoy, but they can't because it's how exclusive it is. Which is another thing a lot of people, you know, kind of get hung up about. And it's like 3 hard pulls, I'm pretty sure in every state, when you apply for a Capital One card. So it's like, you're taking pretty hard dings to your score every single time, whereas like an Amex might only be an Experian, you know, something like that, or a Chase could only be 1 or 2 credit bureaus depending on which state you live in, but Capital One seems to be across the board for 3 hard pulls every single time. Along with that is also like low limits, right? A lot of people get approved for Capital One cards, and, you know, for the most part, their limits aren't necessarily the most amazing. I know there's some people that had just got a Venturex card and it's just a 30K limit, cool, but for a lot of people, they're putting buckets, right? And we remember buckets, right? It's basically these little systems in which they lock you into a certain credit score at time of inception when you're applying for this credit card, and it's very hard to kind of come out of it and grow out of that credit limit. So usually if you have a 5K limit, you're really not going to have 10K anytime soon, but, you know, your mileage may vary, of course. And a lot of people are upset, and it's no wonder that some of the most popular videos on YouTube and on my channel are raising your credit limit with Capital One. For some reason, specifically the Quicksilver card ends up being like one of the most popular ones. Why does that do so well? Why does that outperform everything else? And if I had to be candid and tell you why I think that is, it's probably because, well, you're trying to provide a solution to a solutionless problem, right? Like, if you're bucketed with Capital One, there's really not much you're going to do. You could try to overspend, but it's very hard to break out of that and give yourself a higher credit limit. And of course, the Venturex is kind of an outlier here. You usually get higher credit limits with that card. Now, one thing I do like about that is if you are a beginner and getting started, I always recommend get the Capital One secured card, get a Quicksilver, get a SavorOne. These are all cards that are going to help build your credit score. And with low enough limits, I mean, given the state of the economy right now, how many trillions of debts the credit card debt is actually out there, I think lower limits for the general population is probably a good thing, right? Let's be honest. It's probably a good thing that I only had a $500 limit on my Capital One secured. 6 years later, it's still 500, but, you know, if I was more irresponsible, I could have easily overspent on that, and it wouldn't have been good. Meanwhile, American Express, you know, I could be 18, just, you know, 680 credit score, get approved for a platinum, and have a pay over time limit of like $15,000 that I could spend tomorrow. So in one way, I would agree. I actually like how conservative Capital One can be in limiting credit limits that they would actually end up giving you. And speaking of some of those other cards, like the SavorOne, I think is a great alternative if you're trying to mitigate annual fees. Again, American Express will give you an Amex Gold card with a $250 annual fee without you even realizing what a credit card is in the first place. So having a card like the SavorOne that you can look to, it's like, wow, I'm getting 3% for grocery, dining, same exact thing as the Amex, except the Amex is 4x, SavorOne is 3x or 3%. Can we stop? Can we stop with the rain? This is too much. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. If we hit 10K, we're going to go to the most dangerous hotel in America, which seems to be as dangerous as this monsoon right now, but I do it for you guys, right? But remember, the SavorOne has no annual fee, whereas the Amex has a $250 annual fee, right? So if you're just looking to have only profit from your cards for just your general spending, grocery spending, get the SavorOne card. You're going to get a ton more value back from that if you're just your average consumer and you're not traveling that often. And one thing I do like about Capital One as well is I like that they actually allow you to take your cash back, so my SavorOne, and maybe down the road 4 or 5 years from now, I want to start traveling, I built my credit score up, whatever, I can now get a Venture X and combine the cash back to miles and use that for travel for the future. So I like that a lot. Which, speaking of the travel portal, I don't necessarily hear a lot of people getting a ton of value from the Capital and Travel portal. Not saying it's not valuable, I just don't know why I don't hear it very often other than just the $300 credit on the Venture X. Maybe you guys know. One thing I do like that they do, however, is they do have that price match guarantee. What is it called? Frogger? Which pretty much just matches in the portal if you see a flight or a hotel a little bit cheaper on there. So it's pretty cool to actually have that feature. But again, it's based on you and your lifestyle. If you think Amex points are more valuable for their transport partners versus Capital One miles, etc., then maybe Amex is for you. Maybe you get a lot of value from the transport partners of Capital One, and that's perfect. And I will say, having not experienced it myself, but just reading a lot and talking to a lot of people in this game, seems like Turkish is pretty good to have as a transport partner, right? Like, super insane value. And you basically, if you don't have Capital One, you only have 2 other options, I think, with City and Built to be able to transfer those points to Turkish. So for you guys out there who are that advanced, yeah, Turkish seems pretty cool. Because honestly, you could just be like this guy Matt down below and just telling me I'm completely wrong. So please let me know if he is correct and just the type of redemptions you guys are able to do down below, please. Now, another thing I actually like about Capital One is that most, if not all, correct me if I'm wrong, their cards have no foreign transaction fees. So if you are going to be traveling abroad, no foreign transaction fees, right? That's a good thing to have. Whereas there are some Chase cards and American Express cards that do have foreign transaction fees. Well, it seems like you're going to be able to use these cards in a lot of different places. And even just looking at restaurants or groceries, you're able to use this anywhere abroad, not just in the United States like we would see with an Amex credit card. Another thing I like about Capital One, and something I use personally, was that their 360 savings account was very, very competitive, even for businesses that are only in the cloud, right? This is a brick and mortar business, at least for now. I know they're starting to close locations. They want to be a cloud only bank. But for now, as a brick and mortar business, very, very comparable to like an Ally, etc. So I usually really like their savings accounts and recommend it to a lot of people. And again, if you're a person that likes the idea of walking into a physical bank, Capital One might be good for now. I don't know how long before they decide to close all of their branches, if they even will, who knows. But if you like that versus like Amex, where it's basically all online, then that also could be good for you. And that's basically like my dad, just an old school person. That's fine. Another thing I do like is the simplicity, right? You're not really having to deal with so many different coupons and credits, etc., like you would on the Chase Sapphire Reserve or the Amex Platinum card. It's just straight easy value that you can usually get through the travel portal. And for no annual fee, you can get a really good food card in the SavorOne, which if you're a person that wants a lot more simplicity, which I think a lot of people do, I think the Capital One Duo could be a great setup for you, given your life situation at this time. So I don't know, man. It's not really a harsh critique. I actually generally like Capital One for the most part. So I'm just generally a little bit uninterested, and that's fine. But again, as I travel more and more in 2024 and 2025, I'm hoping they open up more and more lounges, which would entice me to kind of come over to the Capital One side just that much more. And if you want to see an entire roadmap of my 2024 and 2025 travel, check out this video here. But as always, thank you guys for hanging out this Sunday. So I appreciate you guys. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you.